Ma'am, step away from the male, now.
Officer, lower your voice. That's my son. He's autistic. You're escalating him.
He looks impaired. Step back or I will separate
I am his
you.
legal guardian. Do not touch him. This is a medical situation.
Hands where I can see them.
If you grab him, he will panic. Remember...
The dashcam footage didn't lie, but it also couldn't capture the sheer absurdity of the moment. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2:14 p.m., when a decorated career ended and a city's budget was about to take a nearly $1 million hit. Officer Kyle Miller, 28 years old and convinced he was the thin blue line standing between order and chaos, sat in his patrol car watching a scene unfold that he completely misunderstood. Across the lot of the sprawling Washington Park, Dr. Eleanor Vance was trying to get her son into her silver Lexus SUV. Eleanor was 54, a woman of immense dignity, the chief of neurology at St. Jude's Hospital, and a board-certified specialist who had spent 3 decades saving lives. But to Officer Miller, watching through a windshield tainted by his own biases, she wasn't a doctor. She was just a black woman struggling with a large, resistant man near a luxury vehicle. The man was Marcus Eleanor's 22-year-old son. Marcus was 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered, and severely autistic. He was nonverbal and was currently experiencing what Eleanor knew to be a mild sensory processing delay. They had been walking in the park enjoying the sunshine, but a sudden loud noise from a nearby construction crew had caused Marcus to freeze. He planted his feet, rocked slightly, and made a low humming sound. It was his way of regulating his nervous system. Eleanor, patient and loving, had her hand gently on his arm, whispering to him, guiding him slowly toward the safety of the car's interior. She wasn't dragging him. She was grounding him. But from 50 feet away, Officer Miller didn't see a mother comforting a son. He saw a suspicious woman trying to force a disoriented man into a car against his will. Before we get into how this officer's assumption destroyed his life and cost the taxpayers $900,000, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever been misjudged by someone in authority based solely on how things looked? Type yes or no below. And if you believe that police need better training on interacting with the autistic community, hit that subscribe button. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to hear how it ends. Miller put his cruiser in drive and rolled up behind the Lexus, blocking Eleanor in. He didn't run the plates. If he had, he would have seen the vehicle was registered to Dr. Eleanor Vance with a clean record. Instead, he stepped out, adjusting his belt, already deciding that he was interrupting a kidnapping, or perhaps a domestic dispute involving a drugged victim. He walked with that swagger, the one chest-out hand resting near his holster, convinced he was about to be a hero. Eleanor heard the boots crunching on the gravel and turned. She didn't look afraid. She looked annoyed. She was in the middle of a delicate medical intervention with her son, and she knew exactly how fragile Marcus's equilibrium was right now. "Ma'am, step away from the male subject," Miller commanded, his voice booming across the quiet parking lot. Eleanor didn't let go of Marcus. She knew that if she broke physical contact now, Marcus might panic. She kept her voice level, the same tone she used when commanding a surgical theater. "Officer, please lower your voice. This is my son. He is autistic and having a sensory episode. I need you to give us space so I can get him seated." Miller didn't hear son or autistic. He heard noncompliance. He looked at Marcus, a large grown man rocking back and forth, looking at the ground, unresponsive to the uniform. To Miller, Marcus looked intoxicated or drugged. "I said step away from the vehicle and the individual now. He looks like he's under the influence." "Are you trying to force him into this car?" "I am not forcing him," Eleanor said, turning her body slightly to shield Marcus from the officer's aggressive stance. "I am his mother and his legal guardian. He is nonverbal. You are escalating a situation that is under control. I am Dr. Eleanor Vance, and I am asking you to step back." Miller's face flushed. He was 28 with 4 years on the force, and he hated being told what to do, especially by a woman he had already categorized as a suspect. "I don't care who you say you are. I'm conducting an investigation. Step away or I will make you step away," He unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. The situation had gone from 0 to dangerous in under 60 seconds, all because one man couldn't imagine that the scene before him was innocent. Eleanor realized immediately that logic wasn't working. She needed to de-escalate this for Marcus's sake, but Miller was making it impossible. Marcus, sensing the tension, and the new aggressive stranger began to hum louder, his hands flapping slightly, a self-soothing stim. To Officer Miller's untrained and prejudiced eye, this looked like the victim was signaling for help or preparing to fight. "Sir, listen to me closely," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "He is not on drugs. He has autism. If you grab him, he will fight back out of fear, not aggression. You are creating a danger where there is none. I have his guardianship papers in my purse in the front seat. Let me get them." "Don't reach for anything," Miller shouted, his hand now gripping the handle of his service weapon. "Hands where I can see them. You are detaining this man against his will. I'm separating the parties." Miller moved in, reaching out to grab Marcus's arm to pull him away from Eleanor. This was the critical error. The moment Miller's hand clamped down on Marcus's bicep, the young man yelped a high-pitched sound of pure terror. He didn't understand why this stranger was touching him. He pulled back violently, his size working against him in Miller's eyes. Miller stumbled back and immediately unholstered his taser. "He's resisting, ma'am. Get on the ground. You are under arrest for kidnapping and obstruction," Miller yelled, panic creeping into his voice. He was losing control of a situation he had created. "Do not touch him," Eleanor screamed, breaking her calm for the first time. She stepped between the gun and her son, hands raised, palms open. "Do not taser him. He does not understand." Passers-by were stopping now. A woman walking her dog pulled out her phone. A contractor from the nearby site stopped his truck. The camera on the phone started recording. It captured a 54-year-old woman in a blazer and slacks, standing protectively in front of a terrified young man while a young officer pointed a taser at them, screaming commands that made no sense. "Get on the ground now!" Miller was running on adrenaline and confirmation bias. He saw a non-compliant suspect shielding a violent male. He didn't see a mother protecting a child. Eleanor slowly knelt, knowing that if she didn't, this trigger-happy officer might actually fire. "It's okay, Marcus. Mom is here. Look at Mom," she said, keeping her eyes on her son even as she knelt on the asphalt. Marcus was hyperventilating, rocking violently now, totally unmoored without his mother's touch. Miller holstered the taser and rushed forward, grabbing Eleanor's wrists and wrenching them behind her back. The handcuffs clicked a sound that cut through the afternoon air like a gunshot. "You are under arrest," Miller panted, feeling like he had just neutralized a threat. He dragged Eleanor up and pushed her toward his patrol car, leaving Marcus standing alone, confused and terrified in the parking lot. "You cannot leave him there," Eleanor shouted as she was shoved against the cruiser. "He cannot be left alone. He has the cognitive processing of a young child. You are endangering a vulnerable adult." "Backup is on the way for the victim," Miller spat back. "You just worry about your felony charges." Eleanor Vance, a woman who had shaken hands with senators and directed millions of dollars in medical research, stared at Officer Miller with a look that would later be described in court documents as chillingly calm. "Officer," she said, her voice devoid of fear, replaced by a cold fury. "You have just made the last mistake of your career. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I told you he was autistic. Because when you lose your badge, this is the moment you will think about." Miller ignored her, shoving her into the back of the cramped patrol car. The door slammed shut. Through the plexiglass, Eleanor watched in horror as 2 more patrol cars shrieked into the lot. Officers jumped out and surrounded Marcus. She saw them shouting at him. She saw Marcus cover his ears and scream. She saw 3 officers tackle her son to the pavement because he wouldn't comply with commands he couldn't understand. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, not for herself, but for the trauma they were inflicting on her boy. She closed her eyes and began to memorize every detail. The time, the badge numbers, the procedure violations. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a plaintiff, and she was preparing for war. The drive to the precinct was short, but the silence in the car was heavy. Miller was radioing ahead, pumping himself up, describing the suspect as combative and the victim as a large male requiring restraint. He was trying to build his narrative before they even arrived, a common tactic for officers who subconsciously know they've messed up. Eleanor sat in the back, her wrists aching, her mind racing. She was worried about Marcus. Where were they taking him? Was he sedated? Was he injured? Every minute he was separated from her was psychological torture for him. When they arrived at the precinct, Miller yanked Eleanor out of the car and marched her into the processing area. It was a busy Tuesday. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Miller paraded her in like a trophy a kidnapper caught in the act. "What do we have here, Miller?" asked the desk sergeant, a man named O'Malley, who had been on the force for 25 years. He looked at Eleanor. He saw the tailored blazer, the expensive watch, and the way she held her head high despite the handcuffs. He frowned. Something didn't look right. "Kidnapping, obstruction, resisting arrest," Miller announced proudly. "Caught her in the park trying to force a drugged male into a vehicle. Had to separate them. Male subject was combative backup, took him to County General for eval." Eleanor spoke before Miller could continue. "I am Dr. Eleanor Vance. The male subject is my son, Marcus Vance. He is autistic. I have full legal guardianship. My identification and the guardianship court order are in my purse, which Officer Miller seized but refused to check." The room went quiet. Sergeant O'Malley looked at Miller, then back at Eleanor. He stopped typing. "You're Dr. Vance, the neurologist." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I treated the mayor's daughter for epilepsy 2 years ago. Now, Sergeant, I need you to locate my son immediately. He is at County General, likely in restraints, and he is terrified. If he is sedated without my consent, that is medical battery." Miller rolled his eyes. "She's lying, Sarge. She was aggressive. The guy didn't even know who she was. He wouldn't speak to her." "He's non-verbal, you idiot," Eleanor snapped, her patience evaporating. Sergeant O'Malley stood up slowly. He took the purse from Miller's hand. He didn't ask. He just took it. He opened it and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The driver's license read, "Eleanor Vance, M.D." Behind it was a hospital ID badge designating her as Chief of Neurology. And folded neatly in a side pocket was a laminated copy of a legal document titled Order of Guardianship for Incapacitated Adult. O'Malley looked up at Miller. His face was pale. "Miller, did you run her plates?" "No, I saw the crime in progress. I reacted." Miller stammered, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. "You saw a black woman with a nice car and a disabled son, and you saw a crime," Eleanor corrected him. "You violated the ADA, you falsified probable cause, and you arrested a custodial parent for kidnapping her own child. I want your lieutenant. Now." O'Malley didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone. "Get the lieutenant down here. Miller just arrested Dr. Vance." Minutes later, Lieutenant Henderson stormed into the booking area. Henderson was a no-nonsense commander who was trying to clean up the department's reputation. When he saw Dr. Vance in handcuffs, he looked like he might have a stroke. "Uncuff her," Henderson barked at Miller. "But Lieutenant, she was resisting. The victim is her son," Henderson yelled, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. "Uncuff her right now." Miller fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. As the metal cuffs clicked open, Eleanor rubbed her wrists. She didn't say thank you. She looked at Henderson. "Where is my son?" "We have officers at the hospital, ma'am. They say he's distressed but safe. We can have an escort take you there immediately." "I don't want an escort," Eleanor said, her voice icy. "I want a ride to my car if it hasn't been towed, and I want the body camera footage from this officer preserved. Do not delete a single second of it. We wouldn't dream of it, Henderson said, trying to salvage the situation. Dr. Vance, I am incredibly sorry. This was a grave misunderstanding. Officer Miller is young. He is dangerous. Eleanor cut him off. He profiled me. He traumatized a disabled man. He refused to look at evidence that would have cleared this up in 10 seconds. That isn't a misunderstanding, Lieutenant. That is incompetence and bias. And I assure you my lawyer will be in touch before the sun goes down. Eleanor walked out of the precinct with her head high, but inside she was trembling with rage. She took a cab straight to the hospital. When she found Marcus, he was strapped to a gurney, sedated with bruises on his arms where the officers had tackled him. Seeing her son like that broke her heart, but it also steeled her resolve. She wasn't just going to sue for money. She was going to ensure Officer Miller never carried a badge again. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. It wasn't just a local complaint, it was a federal civil rights suit. Vance v. City of Seattle and Officer Kyle Miller. The complaint alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment false arrest excessive force and egregious violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The media got hold of the story fast. The headline was everywhere, "Hero Doctor Arrested for Kidnapping Her Own Son." But the real smoking gun was the video. The bystander video from the parking lot was released online, and it was damning. It showed a calm, reasonable woman pleading with an aggressive, shouting officer. It showed Miller escalating, Miller grabbing Miller, ignoring the warnings. Then the body cam footage was released as part of the discovery phase. It was even worse. The audio picked up Eleanor clearly saying, "He is autistic." It picked up Miller muttering, "Looks like he's on PCP," to himself before he even approached them. It showed him sneering when she mentioned she was a doctor. The public outcry was deafening. Protests were organized outside the precinct. Disability rights advocates used the footage as a prime example of how law enforcement fails the neurodivergent community. The city attorney took one look at the case files, the video, and the credentials of the plaintiff, and told the mayor, "We cannot go to trial. We will be destroyed. The jury will give her $10 million if they see those bruises on that boy." They offered a settlement. Eleanor rejected the first two offers. She wasn't interested in a quick payoff. She demanded structural change. She demanded that the department implement mandatory intense training on interacting with autistic individuals led by experts, not other cops. And she demanded that Miller be fired. The union tried to fight it, claiming Miller had qualified immunity and was acting in good faith. But the internal affairs investigation fueled by the pressure of the federal lawsuit found that Miller had violated 6 different department policies, including failure to investigate discourtesy and unlawful detention. 6 months after the incident, the city caved. They agreed to a settlement of $900,000. But for Eleanor, the money was secondary. The real victory came 2 weeks later. The police chief held a press conference announcing that Officer Kyle Miller's employment had been terminated. Furthermore, the state licensing board had decertified him. He could not just move to the next town over and be a cop there. His career in law enforcement was over. Eleanor took the $900,000 check and didn't spend a dime on herself. She used it to start the Marcus Initiative, a non-profit organization dedicated to training first responders on how to recognize and safely interact with people on the autism spectrum. In the final scene of our story, we see Eleanor and Marcus back in the park a year later. It is a beautiful autumn day. Marcus is sitting on a bench, watching the leaves fall, a small smile on his face. Eleanor sits next to him, holding his hand. The trauma of that day has left scars. Marcus is more afraid of uniforms now, more hesitant in public, but they are healing. Eleanor looks at her son, then looks directly at us, the audience. Her voiceover comes in calm and wise. "Justice isn't just about punishing the wrongdoer," she says. "It's about ensuring that the next mother, the one who doesn't have my title or my resources, doesn't have to watch her son be tackled for the crime of being different. We force them to listen. But we shouldn't have had to shout." This story is a reminder that authority without empathy is dangerous. Officer Miller saw what he expected to see, not what was there. He let his bias overwrite his training, and it cost him everything. What do you think? Was $900,000 enough for the trauma caused to Marcus? And do you think police departments in your area are trained to handle autism? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. Awareness is the first step to change. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.
Now, don't make this harder than it has to be.
Officer, am I being detained? Yes or no?
I asked you a question. You're refusing a lawful order.
No, I'm refusing an unlawful one. I'm legally parked, and you have no reasonable suspicion.
Step out of the vehicle right now.
I'm stepping out under protest, and for the record, you're violating.
The dashboard camera of the patrol unit didn't blink. It didn't judge. It simply recorded the heat shimmering off the asphalt of the university parking lot on that bright, unseasonably warm Tuesday afternoon. And Officer Kyle Bannon, sitting in the air-conditioned cabin of his cruiser, had absolutely no idea that the man he was staring at through his aviator sunglasses, a man sitting quietly in a silver Lincoln Navigator, held the power to sign arrest warrants, authorize wiretaps, and determine the fate of families in 3 counties. The man in the Lincoln wasn't a drug dealer. He wasn't a lookout for a burglary ring. He was the Honorable Marcus Thorne, presiding judge of the juvenile court, a man who had spent 30 years navigating the complex machinery of the American legal system. And he was about to become the victim of the very system he represented. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to take a second. Look at where you are right now. Imagine you are just sitting in your car waiting for your son to finish his college lecture. You've done nothing wrong. You are bothering no one. Now imagine a stranger with a gun and a badge decides you don't belong there. If you believe that a badge shouldn't be a shield for bigotry, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. Marcus Thorne was 58 years old, and he carried the weight of his office in the lines of his face and the deliberate way he moved. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit, the tie loosened just a fraction at the collar, having just come from a morning hearing involving a complex custody battle. He was parked in a designated visitor spot at Oak Creek University, waiting for his 19-year-old son Julian to finish a biochemistry final. Marcus had promised to take him out for an early dinner to celebrate. The Lincoln's engine was off. The windows were cracked slightly to let in the breeze, and Marcus was reviewing a case file on his tablet. He was calm. He was exactly where he had the right to be. But to Officer Kyle Bannon, Marcus Thorne was just a suspicious black male in a car that looked too expensive for him to own. Bannon was 28 with only 4 years on the force. He had a reputation in the precinct, though not the kind you want. He was known for being proactive, a code word among certain officers for harassing citizens in minority neighborhoods. Bannon had been patrolling the perimeter of the campus, ostensibly looking for parking violators, but in reality, he was hunting. He saw the silver Lincoln. He saw the dark skin of the driver. And in his mind, the narrative was already written. He didn't see a judge. He saw a target. Bannon pulled his cruiser up behind the Lincoln, blocking it in. He didn't hit the siren, just the lights a quick flash to assert dominance. Marcus looked up from his tablet, checking his rearview mirror. He frowned. He knew the vehicle code inside and out. He was parked legally. The meter was paid. There was no reason for a police interaction. He watched as Bannon stepped out of the cruiser. The officer didn't walk with the professional gait of a public servant. He walked with the swagger of a gunslinger, hand resting on his belt close to his service weapon, chin up, shoulders rolled back. Marcus placed his tablet on the passenger seat. He knew the drill. He had given the talk to his son a dozen times. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden moves. Speak clearly. It was a bitter irony that after 3 decades of practicing law, after serving as a prosecutor and then a judge, he still had to follow the survival guide for black men in America. He placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. He waited. He didn't roll the window down all the way, just enough to communicate. He wasn't going to give up his rights, but he wasn't going to give this officer an excuse to shoot him either. Officer Bannon approached the driver's side window, leaning in close, his reflection distorted in the glass. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't introduce himself. He just stared at Marcus for a long, uncomfortable silence, a tactic designed to induce nervousness. But Marcus Thorne didn't get nervous. He presided over courtrooms filled with murderers, gang leaders, and high-priced defense attorneys. He had been threatened by experts. A staring contest with a 28-year-old patrolman wasn't going to rattle him. "Can I help you, officer?" Marcus asked. His voice was a deep baritone, steady and resonant. It was the voice that commanded silence in a courtroom without needing a gavel. Bannon seemed annoyed that Marcus had spoken first. "What are you doing here?" Bannon demanded, his tone accusatory. "I am waiting for my son," Marcus replied calmly. "He is a student here. Is there a problem?" "We've had reports of loitering in this lot, drug activity, car break-ins," Bannon said, reciting a script he had probably used 100 times. "You've been sitting here for a while." "I've been here for 15 minutes, Marcus corrected him. "And waiting for a student in a visitor lot is not loitering, it's parking. As for drug activity, I haven't seen any." Bannon didn't like the pushback. He wasn't used to people answering back with full sentences and proper diction. He was used to fear. He was used to submission. "I'm going to need to see your license and registration," Bannon snapped, tapping his fingers against the doorframe. Marcus didn't move his hands from the steering wheel. This was the pivot point. This was the moment where the Constitution met the pavement. Marcus knew the law better than Bannon ever would. Under the Fourth Amendment, a police officer cannot detain a citizen or demand identification without reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed. Sitting in a car while black was not a crime. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more authoritative. "Am I being detained?" Bannon blinked. It was the question every bad cop hated. "I asked for your ID." "And I am asking if I am being detained," Marcus repeated. "Because if I am not being detained, I am under no legal obligation to provide identification to you. This is a consensual encounter, and I do not consent to a search or a seizure of my papers. Unless you can articulate a specific crime you suspect me of committing, I'd like you to move your cruiser so I can leave once my son arrives." The air around the car seemed to thicken. Bannon's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He wasn't hearing a citizen asserting his rights. He was hearing a challenge to his authority. And in Bannon's world, challenges had to be crushed. "You're refusing a direct order," Bannon asked, his voice rising. "I am refusing an unlawful command," Marcus corrected. "There is a difference. Delaware v. Prowse establishes that you cannot stop motorists to check their license and registration without reasonable suspicion. You have none. My car is legally parked. I am engaging in no illegal behavior. You are fishing, officer, and you are fishing in the wrong pond." Bannon took a half step back and unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw the weapon, but the threat was clear. It was a movement meant to terrify. "Step out of the vehicle," Bannon commanded. "Now." Marcus Thorne watched the officer's hand move to the holster. His heart rate increased, a physiological response even a judge couldn't control, but his mind remained cold and analytical. He was calculating the odds. If he stayed in the car, Bannon might escalate to breaking the window or claiming Marcus was reaching for a weapon. If he got out, he was exposing himself to physical assault. But getting out also meant there would be more visibility. "I will step out of the vehicle," Marcus announced, clearly narrating his actions for the benefit of the dashboard camera and the body camera he hoped Bannon was wearing. "I am doing so under duress and out of fear for my safety, not because I consent to this detention. I am unbuckling my seatbelt with my left hand. I am reaching for the door handle with my left hand. My right hand remains visible." Marcus moved with agonizing slowness. He opened the door and stepped out, rising to his full height of 6'2". He towered over Officer Bannon by 3 inches. The suit, the posture, the sheer presence of the man should have been a clue, but Bannon was too far gone in his own ego. He saw a big black man and felt threatened. "Turn around and face the car," Bannon barked. "Officer, what is the reasonable suspicion?" Marcus asked again, standing his ground but keeping his hands open and visible at chest level. Pennsylvania v. Mims allows you to order a driver out of a car during a lawful traffic stop. This is not a traffic stop. The vehicle was parked. You initiated this encounter. You need to articulate the crime. You're acting nervous. You're being belligerent. That's obstruction, Bannon improvised. He stepped into Marcus's personal space, trying to provoke a reaction. "And I smell marijuana." Marcus almost laughed. It was the oldest lie in the book. The odor of marijuana was the magic phrase bad cops used to bypass the Fourth Amendment. "I have never smoked a day in my life, officer, and this vehicle is brand new." "If you claim to smell marijuana, you are fabricating evidence, and I assure you that fabrication will be tested in court." "Put your hands on the car!" Bannon screamed, losing control. He grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus didn't pull away. That would be resisting. He went rigid. "Do not touch me, officer. You have no cause to lay hands on me." By now the commotion had drawn attention. Students walking to and from the science center had stopped. Smartphones were coming out. A group of 3 young women standing about 30 feet away were recording. A young man in a varsity jacket was live streaming. The audience Marcus needed had arrived. He looked directly at the girl with the phone. "My name is Judge Marcus Thorne," he said loudly, projecting his voice so the phone's microphone would pick it up. "I am a superior court judge. This officer is detaining me without cause." Bannon froze for a split second. The word judge hung in the air. But then cognitive dissonance kicked in. In Bannon's mind, judges didn't look like Marcus Thorne. Judges were old white men in portraits. This guy was lying. He had to be lying, and lying to a police officer was just another reason to take him down. "Judge, yeah, right?" Bannon scoffed. "And I'm the police commissioner. Spread your legs." The scene in the parking lot had transformed from a quiet afternoon wait into a public spectacle. The sun was beating down, casting long, sharp shadows on the pavement. Marcus stood facing his own vehicle, his hands placed flat on the hot metal of the roof, complying with the physical demands while verbally dismantling the officer's legal standing. He could feel the eyes of the students on him, the lenses of their cameras acting as the only impartial witnesses to this travesty. Bannon kicked Marcus's feet apart roughly. It was an unnecessary aggressive move designed to humiliate. He began a pat-down, his hands moving roughly over the fine Italian wool of Marcus's suit trousers. "This is an illegal search," Marcus stated, his voice calm but hard as steel. "Terry v. Ohio requires reasonable suspicion that the suspect is armed and dangerous to justify a frisk. You have no reason to believe I am armed. I am loading groceries, no. I am waiting for my son. I am wearing a tailored suit. Where exactly do you think I am concealing a weapon?" "Shut up," Bannon grunted. He reached into Marcus's inside jacket pocket. "I am not consenting to you entering my pockets," Marcus said. "That goes beyond a Terry frisk." Bannon pulled out Marcus's leather wallet. He flipped it open. Inside, clearly visible, was the gold badge of the state judiciary, and next to it, the official ID card identifying Marcus Thorne as a presiding judge of the juvenile court. This should have been the end of it. This was the moment where any rational officer would have looked at the credentials, looked at the man, realized the catastrophic error, and immediately de-escalated. Bannon looked at the badge. He looked at the ID. But his brain refused to accept the data. He had already decided Marcus was a criminal. Therefore, the ID had to be fake. "Nice prop," Bannon sneered. "Where'd you get this downtown impersonating a judicial officer as a felony?" Marcus turned his head slightly. "Officer, look at the holographic seal. Look at the microprinting. That is official state identification. If you arrest me, you are not just violating my civil rights. You are interfering with a judicial officer. I suggest you call your supervisor immediately. Ask for Lieutenant Miller at the 4th Precinct. He knows me. I don't need to call anyone to know a fake ID when I see one." Bannon said, his ego now fully driving the bus off the cliff. "You think you can just flash a badge and I'll back down? You're under arrest." "For what charge?" Marcus demanded, turning his head fully now to look Bannon in the eye. "Impersonating a judge, obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct, and whatever drugs I find in this car once I tow it." Bannon grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it behind his back, forcing the handcuffs on. The metal clicked shut, a sound that Marcus had heard thousands of times in his courtroom, usually signaling justice. Today, it signaled tyranny. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your career," Marcus said quietly. "I am not resisting, but I am telling you, officer, you are destroying your life right now." "Tell it to the judge," Bannon quipped, oblivious to the irony that would soon drown him. The handcuffs were tight, pinching the skin of Marcus's wrists. Bannon shoved him toward the patrol car. The students were shouting now. "That's Judge Thorne!" one of the students yelled. "He spoke at our pre-law seminar last month. You're arresting a judge, you idiot!" Bannon ignored the crowd. He shoved Marcus into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. The cage separated him from the front, a barrier designed to dehumanize the occupant. Marcus maneuvered himself as best he could, his shoulders aching from the angle of his arms. He took a deep breath. Anger was useless here. Panic was the enemy. He needed to be a camera. He needed to record every word, every sensation, every violation. Bannon got into the front seat. He was pumped full of adrenaline, breathing hard. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch 1 under. Male black. Charges include impersonating an officer, obstruction. Requesting a tow for the subject's vehicle." "Copy that." The dispatcher's voice crackled. "Subject's name. Claims to be..." Bannon chuckled a sound that would later be played for a jury to devastating effect. "Claims to be a Marcus Thorne. Has a fake judicial badge." There was a pause on the radio, a long pause. "Unit 2, Alpha." The dispatcher came back, her voice sounding different, confused. "Did you say Marcus Thorne confirm spelling?" "Thorne." Bannon spelled it out. "Like a thorn in my side." Marcus sat in the back, closing his eyes. He visualized the complaint he would draft. 42 U.S.C., Section 1983. Civil action for deprivation of rights. He mentally outlined the paragraphs: the false arrest, the excessive force, the malicious prosecution. Bannon put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Marcus's Lincoln and his bewildered son, who was just walking out of the science building, behind. As they drove to the station, Bannon kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting Marcus to start begging or bargaining. That's what guys like this usually did. But Marcus sat in silence. A heavy, terrified silence that Bannon mistook for defeat. He didn't realize it was the silence of a man gathering the wrath of God. "You're quiet back there now," Bannon taunted. "Realize the fake badge gig is up." "I have nothing to say to you," Marcus replied. "My testimony will be given on the record." Bannon laughed again. He turned up the radio. He felt good. He had taken a predator off the streets. He had no idea he was driving a hearse for his own future. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. When they arrived, Bannon pulled into the Sally Port, the secure garage where arrestees were unloaded. He hauled Marcus out of the car and marched him into the processing area. The precinct was busy. Phones, ringing, officers typing reports, the hum of fluorescent lights. At the booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 60 years old, a 30-year veteran who was counting the days to retirement. He had seen it all. He was drinking lukewarm coffee and reviewing a shift schedule when Bannon walked in, pushing Marcus Thorne ahead of him. Miller looked up. He saw Officer Bannon looking triumphant. Then he looked at the man in handcuffs. Miller dropped his coffee cup. It hit the desk, brown liquid splashing over his paperwork, but he didn't even notice. He stood up so fast his chair knocked over backward with a loud clatter. The entire room went silent. "What in the hell have you done?" Miller whispered. His face had gone pale. "Got a good one, Sarge," Bannon said, oblivious to the terror in his supervisor's eyes. "Impersonating a judge, fake ID, resisting. Found him loitering at the college." Miller came around the desk. He didn't walk. He ran. He pushed Bannon aside physically, almost knocking the younger officer over. "Uncuff him!" Miller roared. "Uncuff him right now. Sarge!" Bannon looked confused. "He's a suspect. He's got a fake—" "That is Judge Marcus Thorne, you imbecile!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking. "He is the presiding judge of the juvenile court I testified in front of him last Tuesday. Get those cuffs off him before I rip your arms off." Bannon froze. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Miller. The reality hit him like a freight train. The prop, ID, the suit, the calm demeanor, the students yelling. I thought," Bannon stammered. "Give me the keys." Miller snatched the key from Bannon's belt. His hands were shaking as he unlocked the cuffs on Marcus's wrists. As the metal clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists. He didn't shout. He didn't yell. He looked at Sergeant Miller with a gaze that could peel paint. "Sergeant Miller," Marcus said softly. "Judge Thorne," Miller said, his voice trembling. "I am so sorry. I don't have words. We will fix this." "There is no fixing this, Sergeant," Marcus said. "I want my property returned. I want the body camera footage secured immediately. I want this officer's badge number written down. And I want to speak to the captain. Now." Bannon stepped back, hitting the wall. He looked small. He looked like a child who had just realized he had burned down the house. Other officers were staring, whispering. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with the realization of the catastrophe that had just occurred. "Officer Bannon," Marcus said, turning his gaze to the young man. "You asked me if I knew the law. I do, and you are about to receive a very thorough education in it." The next 3 hours were a blur of bureaucratic panic. The captain arrived from his home within 20 minutes, breathless and apologetic. The chief of police was on the phone. The mayor's office was notified. Marcus Thorne sat in the captain's office not as a suspect but as an accuser. He refused the water they offered. He refused the comfortable chair. He stood pacing, dictating his demands. He walked out of the station 2 hours later, escorted by the chief of police himself. His son Julian was waiting outside, terrified and confused. Marcus hugged his son, the first crack in his armor showing as his eyes welled up. He had been terrified not for himself, but for what could have happened if Julian had been the one in that car. Julian didn't have a judicial badge. Julian didn't know the case law. If Bannon had treated a judge this way, what would he have done to a 19-year-old student? The lawsuit was filed on Friday morning. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a scorched earth legal offensive. Thorne v. City, Bannon et al. It cited unlawful seizure, false arrest, excessive force, and violation of the Equal Protection Clause. But the real damage was done in the court of public opinion. The video from the students hit social media that evening. By morning, it had 4 million views. The image of a distinguished black man in a suit being kicked and cuffed by a sneering young officer was powerful. When the news broke that the man was a sitting judge, the story went nuclear. The internal affairs investigation was swift and brutal. They pulled Bannon's records. They found what Marcus suspected: a pattern. Disproportionate stops of minority drivers. Complaints of rudeness and aggression that had been swept under the rug. Stop and frisk, encounters with no paperwork filed. Bannon wasn't just a bad apple. He was a liability that the department had ignored for years. The dashcam footage was released 2 weeks later. It was damning. The audio captured Bannon's mockery, his refusal to look at the ID, his fabrication of the marijuana smell. It was a textbook example of racial profiling. There was no defense. The police union, usually quick to defend their own, stayed silent. There was no spinning this. Marcus did an interview with a national news anchor. He sat in his library, surrounded by law books. "It's not about me," he told the camera. "I have the power to fight back. I have the resources. I am fighting for the father who is a plumber, the son who is a student, the people who don't have a title to protect them. If this can happen to a judge in broad daylight, what is happening in the dark to everyone else?" 6 months later, the settlement was announced. The city agreed to pay $2.5 million to settle the civil rights lawsuit. It was one of the largest payouts in the city's history for a single arrest. But Marcus Thorne didn't keep a dime. He established the Julian Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for young minority men wrongfully accused of crimes. Kyle Bannon was fired. The termination letter was scathing. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he could never work as a police officer in the state again. He faced criminal charges for official misconduct and filing a false report. He pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, receiving probation and community service. His career was over before he turned 30. Marcus returned to the bench, but he was different. The lawyers noticed it. The defendants noticed it. He was slower to rule, more careful. He scrutinized police testimony with a laser focus. When an officer took the stand and claimed reasonable suspicion, based on vague factors, Judge Thorne was the one asking the hard questions. He knew now, in a way he hadn't before, how easily the truth could be twisted by those in power. The story ends here, but the lesson continues. We like to think that justice is blind, that the law applies equally to everyone. But we saw in that parking lot that for some officers, the skin is the only evidence they need. Marcus Thorne survived because of who he was. But the question that should keep you up at night is what happens to the men who are just men. We need to demand better. We need to film, we need to witness, and we need to hold authority accountable. Because the next time there might not be a judicial badge in the wallet. There might just be a tragedy. What would you have done if you were in Judge Thorne's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have reacted differently? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that nobody is above the law and nobody should be beneath its protection, share this story. Let's make sure everyone knows that badge or not respect is a right, not a privilege. Thanks for reading, and stay safe out there.